Good morning, NWI. Welcome to the second episode of Bluer by the Lake, the region's brand new blue focused podcast, hoping that we can shine a light on life in the region through a liberal lens. So, before we get started today, I wanted to give you guys a little context about our interviews. So these were recorded last week before the No Kings protests, and that feels like a lifetime ago. A lot has happened since then, as we all know, and ICE activity has increased in the region since I recorded these interviews. We've had multiple reports of people being detained and put into deportation processes here in Northwest Indiana and in Chicagoland. ICE activity has definitely ramped up in Chicagoland. No surprise there given about how Trump feels about Chicago. So do be aware that they're here, they're operating, and they are on a mission. So be on the lookout. The one piece of advice that I did get consistently across every person that I spoke with is if you don't know who's at the door and they're pounding away, don't answer the door. Tell your kids, tell your moms, tell your grandparents, tell your visitors, do not answer the door if you don't know who it is. So when I started this podcast and I really wanted to help the people in the region get information that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise get. Now, and I thought, an ICE episode would be perfect. So I'd hoped to provide helpful tips for any undocumented immigrants in the region to protect them. However, what I really should have entitled the episode is White Woman Learns What It's Like to Live Life as an Immigrant in NWI. As I was conducting these interviews, it became extremely clear how little I knew about that experience. So I'm hoping that there's something helpful in here for the undocumented community. But what I'm really hoping is other white people like me who think that they know what's going on and really don't know what's going on, listen and get just a little glimpse of the difficulties that people are facing. My ignorance was a little embarrassing. I'm working to correct that now. I'm still going to go ahead and air these interviews because these people gave me their time and they did have some helpful information. And again, I'm really hoping some of this audience who doesn't know what the F is going on in the immigration community and doesn't face these risks, get a little bit of an eye-opener like I did. I'm going to be including some links in the podcast page to learn more, as well as all the links and resources that our interviewees mentioned today. So again, thank you for tuning in. To the entire immigrant community, I am embarrassed by how little I knew, and if I've gotten things wrong, please tell me. I'm going to apologize in advance. And now let's get on into it. Up first is Laura DeBolt, Immigration. So welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm obviously a lawyer. I actually practice in a different area of law, but I first got involved with immigration during the Muslim ban in 2017, where we were all at the airport. And so from there, I moved on to working in different kinds of immigration projects with different pro bono organizations. And, time passes, I got involved with mutual aid groups that were helping immigrants, we call them new arrivals, move out of shelters into permanent housing. And they needed things like couches and plates. And then I was very good at sourcing, and my husband has a pickup truck, and I didn't tell anybody. Yep. Yep, exactly. And I did not tell anyone that I was a lawyer because there was nothing I could do for them at that time. I didn't know how to do asylum. TPS hadn't come out. And so when TPS, temporary protected status, which is now ended for Venezuelans, came out, I learned to do that. And so I assisted people in filing their TPS applications. And then I also ended up starting a small pro bono immigration law clinic in the south suburbs that meets once a week on Sunday at a church. And so from there, I do asylum applications, work permits, change of venue motions, a lot of general counseling. So in the space of a year and a half, I went from delivering couches to running an immigration law clinic that serves hundreds of people.
And doing the Lord's work. There ever was.
This is my mother's fault. She gave me an overdeveloped social conscience. So
You
this is
know,
all her
right?
fault.
Dude, those moms making us like do stuff and be involved and try to fix this mess. So there's been a lot of scary changes in the way ICE enforcement has been applied. You hear these really terrifying stories about people just rolling down the street doing their normal thing, and then a bunch of weird people in jeans and whatever they feel like wearing roll up and say you're being detained. Are these people legitimate ICE members? And if so, how can people know? Can you make them identify themselves? Like, what should someone do in that weird situation?
So our ICE has deputized a number of other federal law enforcement agencies. There's people been pulled off ATF, FBI, some of the other law enforcement agencies who've been pulled off their primary mission to go be ICE agents. And so generally the people who are running around in the ICE vests are in fact ICE. There's a lot of people who are also in plainclothes. The people in the courts are typically in plainclothes. So the difficulty is if somebody has a vest that says police, especially if you don't speak English, that's very intimidating. We are not seeing a lot of ICE impersonators at this juncture, but the situation is really fluid. But so, one of the basic things is know your rights. If you have an encounter with ICE, ICE can say, I'm the police, but you can ask them if they're from ICE or from Customs and Borders Protection. They cannot lie when you ask that question.
Can they refuse to answer it?
If they refuse to answer it, they answer, because the police will answer that question. And so if they refuse to answer it, that answer. If also ICE has been doing a lot of pulling up like the neck gaiters over their face, local police do not do that. It's hot. It's hot and uncomfortable, and they don't want to do that. But ICE wants to hide their identities.
So if they're coming up and they're like, I'm not going to tell you that, I'm not showing you a badge, and their face is covered, chances are good that they're ICE.
Yeah, the chances are good that they're ICE.
If they refuse to identify themselves, do you have the right to say, I don't know who you are, I'm not comfortable going with you, or do you have to comply?
Well, if you don't comply, they'll make you comply. But if you have an encounter with ICE, if you're pulled over in a traffic stop, if you're a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident, you show your documents and you should be gone. If you're not, if you're out of status or undocumented, I don't like the word undocumented because most of my people have documentation. They're just not in status. But if you are undocumented at that point, shut your mouth. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used against you. The burden is on ICE to prove that you are, in fact, a person who does not have authorization to be in the United States. So if you don't say anything, it makes their job a little bit harder. Depending upon their mood, they may just, not so common anymore, but depending on their mood, they may just wave you off, or they might haul you in. Unfortunately, ICE has a lot of latitude, and they kind of don't feel the law really applies to them.
Clearly.
They've always pushed the envelope, but at this juncture, it is much, much worse because ICE agents, as a general rule, aren't really nice people. Not to besmirch
I
the whole
think it takes
thing.
a special soul to rip a baby out of its mom's arms at the border. Yeah, it takes a certain special someone to be interested in that kind of career path.
I think the culture of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, there may be decent people who go into these things, but the culture is so toxic
Yeah.
that it makes not good people.
Okay.
ICE, generally, the cruelty is the point. And so, to some extent, if you get detained, you're kind of stuck.
Okay.
But if you're undocumented, if you have documentation, if you have a work permit, show the ICE agent your work permit. Because that sometimes say, oh, work permit, this person's got this thing, I'll let him go. But right now, partially ICE is just detaining people because they need bodies, because they're under this pressure to have 3,000 arrests a day. And so it is very, very chaotic. Now, if ICE comes to your house, the rules are a little bit different. And ICE has been coming to people's homes. And so everybody should have a know your rights. If you need me to, I can send you some links so you can put up a know your rights and there's also video. But know your rights is if ICE comes and bangs on your door, and they're banging on doors very hard. The guidance I give my clients is unless you are expecting someone and they're the person knocking on your door, you do not open that door. This does not ICE cannot come in without a warrant, and it's a judicial warrant. But what is also very important though for people is, and I got this from a community leader in the south suburbs, but she said it's very important because she goes, in my culture, we don't talk to our children about this. And we really need to talk to our children about know your rights stuff and coming to the door, because a lot of times what happens is the adults have know your rights, they know, but the kids don't. And the kids are the ones who open the door.
Right, right, right.
And it's a very uncomfortable conversation for parents to have, but it really could mean the difference between being detained and deported or ICE moving on to somewhere else.
That's a good point.
That's not to say that ICE might not wait around your house and pick you up later, but right now we are, every time, um, it's kind of like you lock your car door. If somebody really, really wants to get in your car, they're going to get in your car. But if they're just looking for bodies, they're going to go on to the next one. That's a terrible analogy, but true.
No, but it's apt because that is really, I mean, this is optics and that's what they're looking for is filler.
Yeah, they're looking for optics. So in Illinois and Indiana, we have not seen workplace raids. A workplace raid is relatively unlikely in Illinois for some logistical reasons.
Why is that?
So Illinois has something called the Trust Act. There's extremely strong boundaries between state police functions and immigration enforcement. Where so thank you, yep, back in 2017 in the Illinois Senate and General Assembly. But while we know there is informal one-to-one information sharing between police and ICE. ICE is not allowed to utilize state or police assets in immigration enforcement. When
And
you
how
see
does
these
that
like
differ from Indiana?
these Indiana doesn't have these rules. Illinois is a minority in these states in this, but the other thing about Illinois is in Illinois you cannot use local police, and so something like raids are like in a workplace or wherever. Those are extremely resource intensive. There's got to be people
Okay.
there. They got to have somebody to run the perimeter. They have to have some place to take everybody they detained. Then they have to sort them out because they're inevitably going to pick up people that they're not supposed to have picked
Right.
up.
You need cars,
Yeah,
you need a
yeah.
place to
You
put
you need a
people
lot of bodies.
and
And
people.
so it's just less likely. And then also in Illinois, because Illinois does not have any nearby immigration detention facilities, they got to take them all out to Broadview. They got to process them and they got to ship them out to Indiana or Kentucky.
Okay.
That's not to mean they're not doing it, but in Illinois, you're seeing the raids. Yeah, the raids that are happening are for theater. The real detentions and the numbers are coming from people who are being detained at ICE check-ins at IDB Wells, which is where our Indiana people check in as well. At ISAP, which is the people who do the anklet monitoring and the phone monitoring, and at the immigration court, where they are, DHS is moving to dismiss a case. Okay, no more removal case, and then they grab the person and arrest them and throw them in expedited removal. But also, there's lawyers who went to court in Chicago. DHS moved to motion. The lawyer objected. The judge said, okay, DHS, you come back. Department of Homeland Security, it's the government. You come back and you file a real motion instead of this oral thing you just gave me, and I'll rule on the motion. Okay, so attorney walks out with client. They get down to street level. ICE swoops in and arrests him.
And
And
you
so
don't have any protections, even being still involved in an active
he
case?
the problem is that ICE can detain people who have pending asylum petitions. He's not supposed to be deported, but as we know, this government is not really great about following that one either.
Yeah, okay. So now what's the case in Indiana?
People in Indiana, as a general rule, they go to ICE check-ins in Chicago. They go to ISAP in Chicago.
Mhm.
They may or may not have their immigration courts in Chicago, or they may have been moved to Indianapolis.
Okay, so there's nothing going on in Lake County here
No, there is.
or in NW.
So ICE has been in, and I didn't see it myself, but I have this from two credible sources that ICE has been out in Hammond. They've done some in Hammond in the last couple of weeks, not every day, but periodically. They've done some door knocking and if not some door knocking, like really hard, like bang, bang, bang door knocking. And fortunately,
Yeah,
the
if
person,
somebody's bombarding your door, I think chances are it's just somebody you don't want to talk to.
I think that's very true. But it's the psychology, or somebody's like, oh my God, they're going to break down my door. I better open it. And your local police will have a warrant and it looks different. A warrant from the local police looks substantially different than the detainer thing from ICE, and half the time they don't even have that. One of the things I do recommend for people is to try to see what your local police look like. There's newspaper articles, or you go on their website and they're dressed up, and see what they look like. And if those people at your door don't look like that or have their faces pulled up, they're not local, they're not police.
So, but for the most part here in Northwest Indiana, what you're hearing is not so much workplace raids, but be aware of the potential for door knocking.
Yeah, well, door knocking, and they also have been hanging around the grocery store parking lots. And exactly what they're doing there, we're not really sure. ICE does have the ability to just walk up to people and start asking them questions. And sometimes I have clients who they, have an encounter with a police officer and they vomit their entire life story, and now they're in detention. Where if they just kept silent, you are not obligated to answer. You can keep silent, and then they have to do the work. But sometimes people talk themselves into detention.
I see.
The other recommendation I give to people too is drive like a grandma, especially in Indiana. I cannot tell you, you got to have a license plate, have your license plates, have your car in working order. Nothing like no broken taillights, no broken headlights, nothing that would cause the police to pull you over. Do not speed. I have a driver's license. I know that's a problem for people living in Indiana because it's very hard to get them licensed, but have car insurance. You can get car insurance even if you can't get a license. If you drive with no license, but you have insurance, that usually is just a ticket. You can't stay in your home forever, but you move about your daily life with care and caution, and then reduce the opportunities for you to have an encounter with law enforcement or encounter with ICE. Because in Indiana, the police do call ICE. They do honor detainers. But I give the same advice to my people in Illinois too, is because you just minimize your contact with law enforcement. For 50% of deportations from the interior of the United States, they have started as a traffic stop. And it's just one of those things. And I mean, just drive like your grandma. Do not speed. Do not hang out in public places. The Home Depot parking lot is a big place where people get work, and that's something that they're going to have to manage. And ICE, everybody knows it.
ICE is basically waiting for people to need the necessities of life and to seek
Yeah,
such as food, shelter, and work, and then is spending time in the
yeah,
places where they would go to get
yeah.
that.
And one of the things too is also people, especially if they work in a workplace, too, people who work in hospitals, not so much schools, but those kind of public places, to have a plan for if ICE comes into your place of business, because ICE is not entitled to enter private spaces without a judicial warrant. It's the same thing as why they can't come in your house without a judicial warrant. The grocery store. They can hang out in the parking lot. They can hang out at the front of the grocery store. You go into the back rooms where only the employees go, the break room, the whatever. It has to have a warrant to go, and you can let them in, unfortunately, but ICE has to have a warrant to go back there.
Do they have to have a warrant to arrest somebody inside a grocery store in the shopping area?
No, they don't, because they can basically make up their own rules. If the person turns out to be a citizen, then they have no jurisdiction over them, but that's a different problem. They don't have to have a warrant to arrest. The detainer gives them the authority to arrest, but they are not entitled to unmitigated entry, because remember, you do have a Fourth Amendment right against search and seizure.
Okay.
And so they
That's the
have to get
major
the
backstop right now, basically.
yeah,
The only barrier between ICE being
yeah,
able to do whatever they wish is that
yeah.
Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, and in general, I think there are some cases where ICE has pushed themselves into places, but in general, refusing to open doors has been pretty successful. I know it really made the first ICE sweeps in Chicago mad because KYR, Know Your Rights, had been pushed out so extensively. But so, you got just basic KYR, and also people who work in hospitals. I was having a conversation with a nurse, and she's like, I don't think my hospital has a policy. But that one is take it up with the head of your reunion, because there should be a policy
So
where,
for example, ICE rolls up to a hospital. What can they do?
well, because the hospital theoretically has, because the hospital basically controls their space. So their like little lobby space is a public space, but they have rules about visitors. And they don't always do a ton of enforcement of them, but most of them have visiting hours. Like you have to be a relative or a friend or like a guest to be there. So once you go into these non-public spaces, then you've got to have a judicial warrant. And most hospitals that have thought about this, about like Cook County Hospital in Chicago has a really robust really robust for this, because they also have to consider like police presence too as well, because these same things about know your rights also apply to the police. If the police come into your house and they just want to knock on your door, you don't have to let them in unless they have a warrant. And they're not entitled to come in unless they have a warrant. I think most of us we view the police as friendly or benign, but these know your rights, they also apply to police. I love a National Immigrant Justice Center, which is immigrantjustice.org, has a ton of KYR know your rights hand or like flyers and things for different causes. Their NIGC is very good. The Resurrection Project is very good and they're constantly updating these things because they keep changing.
Yeah, and every time you turn around, you hear some new horror stories. So we'll be definitely posting links to all of those with this podcast. But let's wrap this up with a scenario. So let's say that I, an American citizen, am at my grocery store and I happen to have a Hispanic look to me. And ICE comes up and they say, "Come with us." Now, what would be your advice for my next course of action?
Like, I know I'm a US citizen, show your passport, your driver's license, whatever identification you have. Usually ICE, when they pick up US citizens, it's usually because they're looking for somebody else in the family or in the central family unit that is a
Right, somebody,
non-citizen.
and it's a family with some
Yeah.
undocumented and
Yeah,
some.
it's there. It usually ends up being somebody in a mixed status family. They call them collateral arrest, is when they're looking for one person and yeah. And then if you do get as far as detention, repeat it over and over. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born here. You do not have the right to hold me. And what we found is usually, not always, but usually the people who are very clearly native born, born in the United States, who spent their whole life in the United States, people, they generally don't get any further than detention processing, and then you can sue ICE for violating your civil rights. There's some lawyers putting together those cases.
Good, thank God.
But Trump deported about 70 U.S. citizens in his first term. There were more people whose U.S. citizen status was derived from birth from someone else, and it was a little bit sticky, and people didn't do the chain, or they didn't give them the due process to do the chain.
So we're not talking about somebody that was born here, raised here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, got you.
And to be honest, it sounds terrible. The more ethnic you look, the more, the blacker you are, the more
The
Hispanic you
reality of
look,
the code.
the more foreign you look, the higher your risk.
Okay. Do you recommend people carry passports, or is driver's license sufficient?
For U.S. citizens, I don't know.
I don't want to roll around with my passport if I
I
don't
don't
have
want to roll with my. Well, I have global entry, so I've
it.
I don't have a real ID because I just haven't gotten one yet. I have a global entry card, so that's what I use.
Okay.
I mean, I think, to be honest, the inconvenience of the likelihood of somebody U.S. citizen getting picked up by ICE is, to be
Low.
honest, your average just Joe Schmo U.S. citizen is pretty low. And you usually do get a phone call in immigration detention, and then you call somebody and say, "Hey, come bring my passport." I think that carrying on your passport is a little
Yeah, we're not there
risk.
yet.
We're not there yet. Plus, because the risk of
You
losing,
don't stay as
yeah,
young.
you don't want to lose your passport. That's a
No,
mess.
dude, they're expensive.
No, they are expensive. So I wouldn't go that far unless you are a person that appears foreign.
Okay.
If you appear foreign, then yes, you want to carry around some proof. That's terrible. I know that sounds terrible.
I know, but
But
it is the reality. We are a country that was founded on immigrants, and we've had multiple generations of intermarriage, and it's just the reality. Let's take the same scenario and then say that the person involved they're a legal resident, they have green cards, and they're approached by ICE in the grocery store and are asked to be detained.
yeah, well, you are. Okay, well, a person who is a legal permanent resident is legally required to carry that card on their person.
Okay.
So they should be carrying that card on their person,
And they know, and this is common knowledge.
that is common knowledge for people. But they should be carrying that card on their person, and you show it to ICE. And generally, with a legal permanent resident, ICE can't just sweep you up. If they just sweep you up, which is possible,
They do
but
a due process.
yeah, because in order to revoke legal permanent resident status, it has to be done by an immigration court judge. So what may happen is they get swept up by ICE. ICE then issues them a notice to appear, which is what starts an immigration court case. Then they've got to go to immigration court, and then sometimes it's just total BS and they drop it. Usually it's just BS and they drop it, but it's a hassle. But legal permanent residents can't be deported, and they can't be long-term detained without a judge explicitly consenting.
Let's do the same thing for somebody who is an immigrant that is in the process of applying for asylum or getting their green card or applying for another protected status, but it hasn't been granted yet.
Yeah, so that's the point where you keep silent. You don't say anything. When you get to processing, you can, because usually that's when they kind of dump you out. Then you get a phone call out, somebody finds a lawyer. But when you get to processing, you can also say, "I have an asylum petition." And the problem is right now they're detaining all those people anyway.
Yeah.
And the pro bono resources are pretty much at this point stretched so thin to be non-existent. And there's not a lot of lawyers who do this kind of removal defense, and they are dropping out of the field in huge numbers because of the burnout. It's the burnout and the fear. I mean, it's
terrifying. And then you're putting a target on your back.
yeah, that's, I mean, and actually the immigration lawyers aren't worried. It weighs in the back of our heads, but we're not super worried about it at this juncture, but it weighs on you. You're filing bond motions over and over and over again, and you're going to lose every time. People are coming to you and they're desperate. And of course their family members are desperate. Everybody's screaming and crying. You have to say, literally, there is nothing I can do. Your loved one's probably going to be deported. And, and right now they're not even, they've completely overfilled the detention centers. So we don't really, but there haven't been a large number of deportation flights going out.
Okay.
It's like, oh, we have 50 shot bail, 50 here and 50 there to some crazy, horrible place. But also, we still haven't figured out what they're doing with Venezuelans, because Venezuela doesn't take their people back. I think El Salvador's had it with the United States. Mexico's not taking them. And so it's this problem. Of course, now Trump wants to send people to Guantanamo, which is a whole new problem. I know the other question you had specifically is if people who are not in status want to participate in a protest. My lawyer perspective is no unnecessary risks. But if somebody is bound and determined, number one, they need to be very careful to stay in a group that's not waving a flag or being hooligan like. I hate to say that, but in the part of and I trained as a legal.
You draw yourself in the environment, the better.
So if you're going to do that at the protest, I would not come at the beginning, so you can kind of see how the tenor of the protest is going. The less attention you draw to yourself, stay away from the front. Stay away. You don't maybe not want to be the huge center of the crowd, but you want to be away, like not quite at the fringe. Keep your head on a swivel, because if it looks like law enforcement is moving in, you need to move away of any kind of law enforcement, because there's too much process, there's too much chaos that you don't really know who's going to wind up with what information. A protest in Chicago is going to be inherently less risky than one in Indiana, because number one, Chicago handles protests. Chicago Police Department is actually very professional in how they handle protests.
Yes, they
It's shockingly so, but they're very professional, and they actually have a very good system, and they don't share information with ICE. And so ICE could go sit it, especially if they're also much more likely to just write a ticket and send people home. But if people get picked up in Indiana, then you're at higher risk, because the Indiana will just give the list of people who are arrested to ICE, and then ICE will say, I want this one, this one, and that one.
That's super interesting, because I would have assumed that like an Indiana protest would be safer because the crowds would likely be smaller, and Chicago is a target, and there's a radar on it.
Well, from an ICE perspective, I think that's true. Now, honestly, there aren't that many arrests. Even in Chicago protests, there aren't that many arrests. Mm-hmm. But if law enforcement does start arresting people, Indiana is inherently riskier because of the information sharing with ICE.
Good to know. We'll make certain that the word on that particular point gets out.
Yeah. I mean, if your protest is smaller and you don't anticipate, and I think, you never know with ICE, but ICE sticks out. They just have that cosplay look about them, like that. Your local cops don't look quite like they're cosplaying.
Nah, dude. And I will just to jump in and my experiences at any of the protests that I've organized or attended here in Northwest Indiana, the police have been incredibly professional and have done triple duty to make certain that our rights are protected. But that said, I'm an American citizen. I don't need to worry that, my name is going to be passed on to ICE. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm a 40-something middle class educated woman. I have a lot of privilege.
Exactly. In case nobody said this to you today, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And for the listeners, I'll have links to all the resources that Laura mentioned posted. Laura, if you could provide a resource for anyone who does get caught up in these dragnets, first steps for what they can do and places they can reach out for help. I know they're thin on the ground now, but I think anything's better than nothing.
And NLG, National Lawyers Guild, does mass defense. It's pretty uncommon for there to be. You really have to work at getting arrested at a lot of protests.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, it's a lot of. The cops don't want to arrest you. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's good to know. So don't give them a reason. Is really your best take here.
Thank you so much for your time, Laura. Let's move on to our next guest. Hello, and
welcome. If you're just joining us, my name is Tracy Martin. I am the host of NWI Takes Action's brand spanking new podcast, Bluer by the Lake. We are trying to get a stronger blue media presence out here in the region because we are bluer than you think. And one of the things that we are very focused on is all of the drama and stress and turmoil happening in the immigrant community right now. And to talk to us a little bit about that, I have asked our local expert, Rafael Manzo Jr. He's an up-and-coming activist here in NWI and the founder of the Hispanic Student Association. So, Rafael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And just so everybody knows, Rafael is very graciously doing this from Paris. Rafael, tell us all a little bit about what you're doing over there right now.
So I just graduated from Calumet New Tech High School, and our school just started a program with EF Tours. So I just left Switzerland like a couple hours ago, and now I'm at my hotel in Paris, and it's 2 a.m.
How long are you going to be in Paris?
I'm going to be in Paris for 4 days, and then we're going to the sea for another days, and then I'm going to be back on the 18th.
Hope that you have the absolute time of your life. It's probably difficult to come home. You know, I know.
I'm
Yeah, I
enjoying
mean,
it.
it must be.
But
Yeah.
it's kind of difficult seeing everything going on at home, and I wish I could, go to a protest or something.
Well, you know what? We'll lift a plaque for you. So I spoke this morning to an immigrant rights attorney who's been doing a lot of asylum clinics and filings and things like that. And she gave me kind of a rundown ICE activity recently in the region. Can you add any perspective that you might have that perhaps that she doesn't? She mentioned that, say, most ICE stops have been either direct door knocking in cities like Hammond or in places where immigrants are known to be going, like all of us do, like to the grocery store, to Home Depot, for job picking up. Is this sort of jibe with your experience?
I have been noticing a lot of people talking about it on social media more than usual. So on social media, especially like Instagram, that's where I mostly do all my stuff. I've noticed there's been a lot more people actually caring and watching out for ICE, because I've usually only seen posts about that on like Facebook pages. But on Instagram, like it's a daily now. I'm seeing new things. They saw ICE in Munster near a Target. They seen them in Hammond near a lot of usually.
That's my Target.
Today.
ICE was at our Target today.
Yeah, my friend's one of the employees, and they said they saw a bunch of unmarked cars, and they apparently stopped somebody.
That's fun news.
Yeah.
So, wow. So things seem to be ramping up a little. Have you heard of any workplace raids in the region?
Workplace raids that I know of so far, no, but they're definitely coming. I know the state legislature try to pass bills. I remember they didn't pass. They were trying to pass a bill to force employers to give the information to the state. I don't actually know if it passed. I know they edited it because they were trying to make it schools and employers have to give like their legal status of all their students and workers, but the Republicans last minute changed their minds about students because they said that was an overreach. I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure for the employers it did pass.
Okay. You have a unique view with your role as a student. Can you tell me a little bit about what the experiences students in the region that you've heard about have had? Have you heard of students that are being deported that had, we're here on student visas? Have you heard of any other impacts along those lines?
That I know of at my school, none of the students have visas specifically for being students. So either they're immigrants because they have a family visa or they're just undocumented. At my school, when there was a peak of ICE activity again, like near the beginning of Trump's administration, we had a good 2 weeks where our Hispanic population was like down on like attendance because a lot of people were scared that ICE would try targeting schools or something. Thankfully, they haven't yet in Northwest Indiana, but we had a lot of people scared near the beginning of the administrations.
It's very clear that I'm a middle-aged white mom in a very comfortable position here in leafy Munster. I don't have to worry when I roll up to Target that if ICE looks at me, they're going to say, hey, you look like a target. I want to try to detain you. If you're an undocumented immigrant, or say, for example, you live in a mixed status household, how does that impact your daily life? This cloud that's hanging over everyone.
Well, for most people, it just makes life much more difficult. I know a lot of people within my community who they're friends with their family with, who have undocumented parents or siblings. They're very scared to go grocery shopping, and it's like completely changed the way people's lives are built. My family used to be mixed status. My mother came here undocumented, but now she's a citizen after 12 years.
You must be relieved.
Yeah, she's been working for her citizenship for a decade, and she came here undocumented. I think it's 19 years now because I'm 18. So she came here like 20-ish years ago, actually. Yeah, 20 years. For us, at least, it was always a fear. But over the past couple years, deportation in Northwest Indiana hasn't been horrible. But now that this administration's in power and they're really ramping up with that mass deportation idea, I've seen a lot of fear. I know a lot of people have been having their children go grocery shopping, and I know a lot of people stay home a lot more. And it's really
Right.
going to affect Northwest Indiana's economy, and that's something that really worries me. The Hispanic population is really growing in Northwest Indiana, and not having all those people going out for groceries is really going to affect our local businesses.
I was considering this from a personal lens. Can you go to your kid's graduation? Do you go to the doctor or do you try to do a telehealth appointment? But it never even occurred to me that there would be economic impacts from the fact that the immigrant dollar has to stay home. Do you know of any organizations that are kind of looking into that? Like what kind of impact that the immigrant dollar staying home is going to have
I
on our
haven't seen
economy?
anybody looking into it so far. Hispanic people tend to spend more money than other minorities, regardless of like where our economic statuses are. So even like low income Hispanic people tend to spend more money than other minorities. So it's just an issue that's gonna affect the entire nation, but locally that's a really big
Right.
one because a lot of our businesses in Hammond, Whiting, and EC are Hispanic owned, and most of their customers are Hispanic people.
They have to stay home.
Yeah.
I know that you are not an attorney, but based on what you've heard from others that are facing some of these challenges about navigating this new normal of life as an undocumented immigrant, do you have any tips that you can share, places or resources where people can go and that you can share safely in this public forum?
A big safe place right now is Catholic churches. I know a lot of them have been helping people in the area, especially our ones in Gary. They're very supportive of people. I couldn't name any off the top of my head because, to be honest, there aren't many organizations in Northwest Indiana that focus on immigration. Have been in contact up here with some organizations from Indianapolis. The Hispanic Student Association is we've been a little bit active recently for the last couple months, but that's because I was graduating high school and we're working on making a
You
big
can't do it
comeback.
all. Rafael, like nobody thought we would need this infrastructure. The protest movements, this podcast, like all of these different pieces of an opposition movement, no one really thought that we would really need that now. And we've all had to been scrambling and doing it from scratch. And it's people like you that are like, I'm graduating high school, but I'm gonna build this Hispanic Student Association and become an activist. Yeah,
And
it
it's
takes
honestly
time.
thick because I've been volunteering since I was 13. When I was 13, I started volunteering at Justice Democrats, this the organization that brought AOC and some of the other like major Democrats in the progressive movement. And then I also worked for another organization called Just Transition. They're doing pretty decent work right now. They've been endorsing local
Yes,
candidates. They
they're
mainly
great.
focus in like the New England area right now. I've been volunteering for
Okay.
a while.
One thing that's been really troubling that we've been seeing in the media is the advent of the unmarked ICE agent, where these
Mhm,
people in jeans and a Cubs hat roll up to you and they say,
mhm,
"Hey, I'm ICE, I'm detaining you," or they say, "You need to come with me."
mhm,
Now, they aren't necessarily identifying themselves as
mhm,
ICE. When you ask them for IDs, they're not giving them to you.
mhm.
Have you heard of any activity in the NWI region where you see these cadres of people who are claiming to be ICE agents that may or may not be?
Recently, I haven't heard anything, but I do know in the past there's been some controversies because there were students from one of the high schools in the eastern side of Northwest Indiana where one of their students like as a joke near the Halloween season, they dressed as an ICE agent like as a joke to try to like he was trying to be funny and say that
Uh,
he was trying to be funny and say that he was going to round up the Hispanic people and it like actually scared
oh my
people.
God.
People actually
That
believed
is
him.
not funny.
That is not funny. And
No.
it scared people all the time, but that I know of recently, no. But it's a really serious issue, and if something like that does happen, that could be human trafficking. That's a really big fear that a lot of people have had. I've heard of a case recently that happened, I think in California, where three women were like actually like kidnapped by an unmarked vehicle that wasn't ICE.
Which is part of what's scary. When I spoke with the immigration attorney this morning, I asked her a similar question, and she told me that law enforcement is required to answer the question if you say, "Who are you? I want to see your badge." If they refuse, you know that they're either ICE or they're an imposter, which doesn't really help you all that much. She says she hasn't heard too much about human traffickers or thugs posing as ICE that aren't ICE up here yet.
Thankfully.
But yeah, it's an issue to be aware of. Another thing that she mentioned to me is that the best way for some immigrant families to protect themselves at home is to start communicating issues about knowing their rights to their children.
Yes.
She said that in general that the immigrant community, while the parents may be very well aware of these issues, they aren't necessarily involving their children in those discussions. And so, like, say for example, ICE comes knocking at the door, kids don't know, just don't answer the door. They just go to the door and they think that's fine, and they're doing their mom a favor and getting rid of some door knocker trying to sell them candy, and it's ICE, and now there's a very awkward situation right there, because the best practice in those situations is to simply not answer. So has that been your experience as a young Hispanic in the region? Have you noticed a lot of families just not talking about this with their kids?
I feel as if personally, I've never had to deal with something like that. Thankfully, my mother, she's only been detained once by immigration. That was when she first came to the country before I was even born. After that, she was pretty fine. She got her legal status pretty early on in my life. But it really is seeming like the shift in culture is going to create a need for a conversation with children. It's a really big thing in the African American community to have a talk with your child about law enforcement, especially young black men, because that is a very big thing that happens. Young black men are just very much more brutalized by the police. I think that's going to have to become a big talk within the Hispanic community with children of both genders, that you just can't answer the door sometimes. And that's something that we shouldn't have to do. People shouldn't have to fear opening the door.
I know.
Yeah.
And it just, I am sorry that has to be something anybody has to think about. I know it's ridiculous for me to say that as, a middle-aged white mom sitting here. But God damn it, man. I thought that I guess this was naive, but for a minute, I thought that we were in a world that was getting better than that. And as a 50-year-old white woman, I'm sorry that it's not. But do you have tips for ways that, say, kids can take the reins and go to parents? Are there cultural barriers that I'm not thinking about here and getting those conversations initiated?
Something I have noticed within Hispanic families is parents tend to be more conservative on things, so they don't look at politics as much. That was something I dealt with. A lot of people think since I'm a progressive in politics so young, they think I'm like being indoctrinated by my parents. My father actually almost voted for Trump in 2016 as an immigrant. He came here as like a teenage boy. With Hispanic people, as you can see with our stats with the 2024 election, Hispanic men actually voted for Trump more than for Kamala. Not women, but men. So having that conversation with your family about politics or immigration is a weird area, because even to this day, even undocumented immigrants somehow still support Trump. So that's just a weird area.
I find it mystifying. I don't get it. There's this gay couple that down the street from me. They were Trumpy the whole time, and I'm like, what the fuck are you thinking? Like, do you think that when it's expedient for him politically to come after you, he's going to? Because, once the thrill of expelling people from the country that are undocumented immigrants wears off, who do you think's next?
Yeah.
He's going to need another group to target once he's done with the one that he has. And he's got 4 more years to go. So, no one is safe. No one is safe. So, Rafael, I need to let you go to bed. Do you have any last thoughts to add? Anything you want to share with the community here?
I feel like I just have to say, being safe is not just about protecting ourselves. It's about making sure that people are still standing to fight another day. So when it comes to protests, you don't have to make the biggest impact, like if you're going out to protest. And when it comes to being safe, you don't have to completely shut yourself out from the world. You just have to make sure that the people around you are safe and that we should be prioritizing community right now more than anything.
Yes, and I got some really great tips from Julie Storbeck, who is the president of the National Organization for Women in Indiana State Chapter. And she recommended very similar things, ways for undocumented protesters to stay safe, and which mainly involve stay in the back, know how to get skit-scatting when you need to skit-scat.
I have always, with my protests, I usually encourage undocumented people not to come, but numbers are also important. So my thing is because I always recommend not to come because I don't want to be responsible or feel the guilt of seeing someone being deported. But if they do come, I do recommend.
So, Rafael, you are a delight. 1000% want to have you on again if you're willing. I have a feeling we can talk about lots of goodies. In the meantime, please find a way to enjoy your trip.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, folks, that's a wrap of the second episode of Bluer by the Lake. Thank you again to Laura and Rafael for your time and for being willing to brave being an early guest on this show. I promise you, we are I'm working as hard as I can to learn the bells and whistles of how to navigate the editor. It will get a lot better looking soon as I learn. But in the meantime, NWI, keep your eye out for future episodes. We're going to try to drop one a week. And that was my dog, Zelda. I love her. So, everyone, have a great, safe rest of your week, and we'll see you by the lake.